Welcome, everybody, to our 2023 Education and Development Career Panel. This is the first of two career panels. I'm excited to be here with you all today. These panels are put together by the Comparative Education and International Development Community at Moray House School of Education and Sport at the University of Edinburgh. My name is Will Smith. I'm the CEID Community Coordinator and the Program Director for the Masters in Comparative Ed and International Development. So as we go through this, please feel free to tweet at us or about the event at Moray House CIAD. Okay, we have a pretty basic day today. The aim of our panel is to really expose students and other interested individuals to a wide variety of work in education and development that is currently being done by those positioned in international and regional organizations. I know for my students and myself, when I was getting my master's in development, I wasn't always clear on what the opportunities were to work in this area. So I think hopefully today we hear from a very diverse group of experienced experts in the field, really demonstrating that there's lots of different skills and opportunities out there, and there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to this. The hope is that these panels are a space for panelists to share their career journey advice and challenges, but especially for students to ask questions related to occupations, career path, to those that are maybe a couple steps ahead of you in their journey. All right, our structure is pretty simple today. I've asked each panelist to share for about 7 minutes, and they're pretty free to share what they would like. So I've prompted them to talk about their current position a little bit, because you may or may not be familiar with either their organizations, but especially what they're doing within the organization, as well as a little bit of their career journey. And as you'll hear, there's lots of different deep experiences in the field. So I've asked them to give kind of the highlights edition of that. My hope is that we have a good half an hour at the end for open and question and answer. And as I mentioned before, if you've got questions, please feel free to add them to the chat as we go along. If they're for specific panelists, please let us know. And then we'll also, during the open question and answer, I'll invite people to go ahead and raise their hand and come in orally as well. So, all right, our panelists today, I'm going to go through all of them, and then I'll invite Leila to come in and share. So our panelists today, I'm really excited. I've known some of them for some time now, and I'm just meeting others today. So we'll start with Leila Loupis, who's the Schools Plus Network Coordinator and Analyst from the OECD. Then we'll go to Ben Sadek, who's the Donors Relation and Partnership Specialist at Education Cannot Wait with UNICEF. Then we'll hear from Ratul Chowdhury, who's the Senior Manager for Learning and Innovations at Room to Read. We'll then hear from Fabricia Devignes, who's a Senior Education and Gender Specialist at the International Institute for Education Planning with UNESCO. And finally, we'll hear from Sidra Minhas, who's the Gender Diversity and Inclusion Advisor for Asia at Mercy Corps. So thank you all for taking the time to speak to us today. Really excited to hear your insights and your sharing. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Leila. So Leila, the floor is yours. Feel free to unmute yourself, and it's all you.
Thanks, Will. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, hear you well.
Great. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, should I say. It's really lovely to be here with you, and it's a privilege to be able to speak to you all. So I was saying, Will, it's going to be hard to keep to 7 minutes, but I'll do my best. And very happy to answer any questions afterwards, of course. So I am currently, as Will mentioned, working at the OECD as a network coordinator for a new project, which is called the Schools Plus Network. But previously, actually, I've held quite a few different positions at UNESCO. So I'm coming from UNESCO as well. I was also the senior project officer in another network, which was the Teacher Task Force that I hope you would have heard of. And I also worked in the team that looks after the Global Education Monitoring Report, which is where I met the wonderful Will, as the communications officer and as a team manager. I also worked in communications at UNESCO's statistical branch before that. And in case you're wondering, I did a Bachelor of Arts as well as communications many moons ago, and not more recently or much later, I did a Master in Public Administration with a specialisation in international development. So in the interest of the complementarity with the other speakers today, I thought I'd speak to you about maybe focusing in on my previous roles in communications and project management, and the kind of skills, the kind of tasks that you do, and the kind of skills that you need to develop. I thought I'd talk about the communications roles, because I thought maybe this is something that maybe might be a bit underrepresented here. But communications roles are incredibly important in most projects and education development initiatives. And that means communicating either about your project to talk about why your project is important, or communicating about the issues that your project is supporting. And what this means in real life is the kind of work that you do is that often, for example, you're taking complex research and data and converting that into formats that a wider audience can understand. And that audience can include the general public, but it can also include policymakers. It can also mean taking messages, important education development messages, and turning them into stories or things that people are interested to hearing about. And the kind of work that you do if you're working in this kind of communications roles in education development is really wide and varied and changes all the time. It can be working on from web pages to social media messages to blogs, or developing events and developing partnerships. And there's something interesting to know is that because in my opinion, most projects need good communications, and especially these days, and we're about to hear from someone who's working on partnerships and fundraising, and you'll hear just how important that is, which means that there is a lot of work in education development communications. There's a lot of jobs out there, certainly what I have seen over the years. And this leads me into another kind of branch of work that certainly I got into starting with these communications roles, but which is when you move more into project management jobs. And in the kind of the project management field, then that takes the communication skills, but takes it even wider when you're working on project management itself, developing project plans, performance indicators, fundraising, developing partnerships, also strategic planning, and also human resource management. So over the years, I've kind of moved in between those two jobs. But basically, the one thing that I found is that those communication skills and those project management skills that you can develop through your studies or on the job actually are kind of cross-cutting skills that are very useful whatever you're doing. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes also, and I'd be very happy to go into more detail about that, but I thought maybe I would share a little bit of my perspective, because as a project manager, I've been involved in a lot of selection and recruitment processes, especially for people who are starting out in their careers, so as interns or as junior consultants. So I'm not an HR person per se, so I just want to add that caveat. So this is coming from someone who's had to select candidates. So what you might find if you are looking for a job in a big international organization such as UNESCO is that obviously they're very hard to come by, and there's not a lot of jobs that are available. So often the way, if you want to get a foot in the door with these organizations, is to start with an internship or a short contract. And I guess probably that's one of my first messages here in relation to that, is that you need to be prepared for chaos. These are not, a lot of these big organizations are big bureaucracies, so they're not as smooth processes as you may expect. Often, for example, if you're applying for an internship, you might be putting your CV online in a system. You might expect to get an answer from that, and you might hear nothing. So I would encourage you also to get direct contacts, be detectives. You can be online detectives to figure out who in an organization is working on a particular project. You know, if you need to, if you can't find their email, try and guess it. You know, most international organizations. So you really have to push those direct contacts. And if you're really struggling to maybe get a foot in the door in an international organization, I would really encourage you to work in maybe a smaller organization or get field experience, especially civil society organizations. Just so you know, sometimes for some of these jobs, we receive 200 or 300 CVs. So you can imagine that the person reviewing these is not going to spend a lot of time on them. Sometimes it's between 5 and 10 seconds per CV, which means that your direct relevant experience for the job has to be the first thing that you see when you open your CV. We don't have time to read in between the lines, and we certainly don't have time to think outside of the box. So that's really important, the preparation you put into your CVs. And I just wanted to finish in the 1 second I have left to talk about maybe overarching skills. I was listening to some previous webinars and people were talking about kind of what skills. So if I'm going to leave you with one skill from today, I would say don't underestimate the power of good writing. And when we say good writing, I mean plain English writing. Our work is very document-based. It's very writing-based. And so I would really invest in good writing and good plain English writing as well, because that's the first thing you're going to be judged on. If you get past the CV phase, you'll probably have to do a written test to get to the interview phase. So the recruiter will be looking at your writing skills. I'm going to stop there, and I'm very happy to answer any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Leila, for getting us started. Some good advice. I think you were on the hiring panel for me when I came on the GEM report. So good memories. Glad I made it through that. So a reminder to the audience today, if you've got questions, please feel free to add them to the chat box as we go along. We're going to hear from everybody, and then we'll have an extended question and answer time at the end. So, all right, now I would like to go ahead and invite Ben up to go ahead and join us for his 7 minutes. So, Ben, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say a big thank you to you, Will, to the CEID, and to Adriana and others that have been supporting behind the scenes. It's a real pleasure to be here. It doesn't feel like that long ago since I was on the other side of this call myself, slightly worried about where I was going to go next in my life and my career. So to now have the opportunity to sit here and share my experiences with you is really is an honor. So thanks ever so much to you all, and to Leila and Fabricia and others that are on the panel with me. Lovely to meet you all. So maybe just to say maybe a minute or two about the role that I'm currently in. I can then give a couple of highlights of my career where I think opportunities arise that allowed me to build on and further my career, and then maybe round off on a couple of tips which are remarkably similar to what Leila already shared. So I work for Education Cannot Wait. We're a global fund that was established a few years ago, a United Nations conference, essentially to increase the amount of funding that would be available to support education programs in countries and areas of countries affected by active conflicts and humanitarian emergencies, many of them with their roots in the climate crisis, as we're increasingly seeing. I work in the partnerships and fundraising team, and our job is essentially to engage with our donor community, whether that's governments like the United Kingdom, Germany, Canada, the USA, the Scandinavian countries, and elsewhere, or with private sector and foundation donors, the likes of the Lego Foundation or large companies that have an interest in supporting education or human development through their donations. My main task, I guess, is to work with colleagues in the communications team, within the monitoring evaluation team, within the programs team, to gather up all of the material, all of the evidence, all of the messaging, and all of the data that we need to make a strong case to our donors for why they should invest money into our fund and the impact that we're having, and to get out there into the world and to build relationships with civil servants, with civil society campaign groups, with members of parliament and legislative bodies in different donor countries, and to essentially sell the fund to the organisations with the resources to support it. Now, what that means on a day-to-day, exactly as Leila said, it's often writing things. It's writing speeches for the CEO to go and speak at an event. It's writing briefings to provide analysis and background on the political dynamics in a given company or a given market, and how we're going to approach it, and what our strategy should be. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of that succinct, plain language written communication skills, which come up time and time again in my job. Other day-to-day tasks could be chairing meetings with the coalition groups and campaign groups to provide updates on our strategy, and to take advice and guidance from our external partners. So there's a real kind of strong kind of diplomacy and communications requirement in the position. So if you're going to work in partnerships and kind of relationship management, you need to kind of equip yourselves with those strong communications and diplomatic skills, I would say. I think another skill set that would be kind of useful for you to embrace, whether it's a skill or not, is just patience, and as Leila said, that kind of ability to be strategic and focused whilst there's chaos going on around you, and understanding what your goal is, your objective is, what your job is, and what you want to get out of a given strategy or task, and being able to shut out the noise that's going on around, and be kind of laser focused on what you want to achieve. In terms of some examples from my career journey, I think a really important part for me was getting out straight after I'd finished my bachelor's degree, and spending some time living in a different part of the world, and teaching in a community in Brazil, an underserved favela community in Rio de Janeiro, and having the opportunity to meet people from different cultures, learn a new language, and understand a little bit about the kind of challenges, the educational challenges, the health challenges, the social development challenges that people were facing in that part of the world, was a really rich experience to build on. And actually, when I sat on the panel for my first job interview, which I got in the international development sector, I was later told by the hiring manager that it was my passion and enthusiasm for one of the stories that I told in the interview about my time in Brazil that got me the job, and that made me stand out from the other candidates who were equally or better qualified than me for the job at the time. So I guess getting out there, getting real experience, and being curious, and finding things that interest you and excite you, and running with it. Working at Plan International, which is a big INGO, was brilliant for me, to go from working in a kind of small campaigning organisation, which was my first job, where I was quite limited in the stakeholders that I would meet. I would often go into Parliament, and I would meet the same old people. Whereas when I went and moved to Plan International, I got the opportunity to work with all of the country offices, to work with the programmatic teams that were delivering the programs on the ground, working regularly with the communications team, the marketing team. So you start to get that real understanding of how these organizations work, how the kind of sector works. I was also lucky enough to have the opportunity to represent civil society on the board of the Education Cannot Wait Fund, who I now work for. So when I was at Plan, having that kind of inside knowledge and view of how the political dynamics around the board, and just to kind of understand where all of the different stakeholders sit on different issues, and to be able to see it all in real time, was a bit of a game changer for me, and was just very lucky, I guess, that at that time Plan had been entrusted to represent civil society on the board. And another big career highlight was around the 2018 G7 summit, where I was part of a coalition of organisations that campaigned for the Canadian government to champion education in conflict and crisis, at the leaders level at the G7, and the the campaign that I was part of was successful in mobilising new funding and kind of generating that political will that led to the funding and the statement that the G7 leaders put out on the day. So I guess being part of those successful campaign wins was really instructive for me, and we made lots of mistakes along the way, and being kind of right in the mix of it and supporting that campaign in different ways was a brilliant career highlight for me. Without rambling on, Will, have I got any time left here? How am I doing?
Why don't you go for another minute or two, and then I think we're good. Then.
Another minute or two. So the 2018 G7, representing civil society on the board of Education Cannot Wait. At Comic Relief, I did quite a different job, which was the next job after that, and I actually managed funding rather than went out and campaigned and advocated for funding for my organisation. So that was a slightly new task for me, and I was able to, I guess, look at it from a different perspective. So when managing funding has been something that I've done in my career as well. And while I have moved away from that now and actually prefer being on the other side and going out campaigning for the money, that was a useful experience. And I think sometimes it's good, particularly early on in your career, which I perhaps was still at that time, is to trial out new things and see what fits most and what fits best. And then probably the biggest highlight of my career so far has been from earlier this year in February. ECW organised a conference in Geneva to try and raise funding towards our strategic plan, which has a target of $1.5 billion US. And we managed to raise 826 million of that 1.5 billion target, which is a 4-year target. And we managed to kind of raise that in month 2 of a 4-year strategic plan. So all of the work that went on last year leading up to that, working closely with the Swiss government, Norwegian government, the German government, the minister from South Sudan, and various other kind of champions and spokespeople for us was a wonderful experience. And I'm very happy to answer kind of more questions about that specifically. But I think just in terms of tips, just to go over what I said previously and build on Leila's comments, be curious, get out there and build relationships, get a mentor. One of the best things for me was reaching out to someone that I didn't really know, that was 5 or 6 years ahead of me in their career journey, working in a similar sector, and just kind of putting myself out there, explaining that I'd sat in meetings with them and kind of admired some of the things they'd said, and can you give me some advice? And that person is now a close friend, and they still provide me mentoring to this day, and that must have been 8 years ago now. So get out there, build relationships, get a mentor, and then find your niche. Spend a few years figuring out what is it that you like doing. Do you like crunching data? Do you like working with spreadsheets? Do you like doing analysis? Or do you like getting out to the meetings with the CEO and supporting the briefing writing? Do you like, as Leila mentioned, the online communications, the digital marketing element? I think building on what you've learned about yourself through your education, get out there and try out a few jobs, internships, entry-level positions, and really figure out what your niche is and what your interest is. And get that real experience, get that real life experience as well, as I mentioned before, highlighting my time in Brazil. And maybe just to round off on saying the hardest thing is getting your foot in the door. Once you've done that, you will go in all sorts of directions, and your natural talent and your enthusiasm for your job and your passion will carry you. And you'll get more confident and more relationships and stronger as you go on. This initial period, getting in the door, is probably going to be the hardest bit. So be patient, believe in your own ability, and do exactly what Leila said. Think outside the box, cold call people, get in touch with people, do what you need to do to get in there, and just also believe that you belong there. That was one of the issues I had moving into this international sector with lots of people with amazing educations from all different backgrounds, and sometimes not really feeling like you quite belong there. And the answer is you do belong there, and you've worked hard to get there. So yeah, I'll finish there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben. Hopefully people are taking notes on some of the excellent advice we're getting on the different skills and even trying to understand yourself better, which is quite important in this. I want to also be thankful so far. I think we've gotten a pretty good sense that this is not a field where you step into and you not necessarily spend 30 years in the same organization and then retire. Oftentimes you're kind of exploring different things, working in different organizations. So which is exciting, but quite different than maybe other areas as well. So perfect. Thanks, Ben. I want to invite Ratul up to sharing. And Ratul, I've got your slides ready, so just let me know when you want to move to the next one.
Yeah, sure. In a second. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Ratul. I'm based in Delhi, India. I work with an INGO called Room to Read. Room to Read as an organization is headquartered in San Francisco, and we've been in operation for the past 2 decades. I work as a senior manager for learning and innovation, which is almost a new vertical that is coming up in the organization, wherein we look at implementation evidence, going above and beyond just what works to how it works for who. And I guess in my day-to-day work, I liaison with a lot of our cross teams from research monitoring and evaluation to program design and operations, because a lot of the learning that we have had in the past couple of years have been through our field work. Room to Read essentially works in 2 different domains, one with foundational literacy for children, and we believe that with more exposure to literature, with support to children through teachers, students can actually learn foundational learning better. And also, the second domain of work is around girls' education, providing life skills to girls in the adolescent age and helping them choose their life agency and strengthen them as they go ahead. Just talking a little bit more about my role, I think this role also came at a time when Room to Read is transitioning from just being an implementation organization to being an organization trying to understand the policy landscape, have a dent in what is happening at scale, and working with government systems in roughly 11 to 12 countries that we are working in. And a lot of my time goes into trying to understand what are the ways things are panning out on ground, how are we reporting our data, and how does that data eventually make sense in order to create compelling narrative for change and for us to sort of take things ahead. And I've been in the sector for about 9 to 10 years now, have dabbled with a couple of different entities, starting from consultancies to philanthropic foundation, and right now I'm with an NGO. So with the next slides, I'd probably share a couple of takeaways with you that I had in the last couple of years. So Will, if you may move to the next slide, please. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of encapsulate the 3 things which probably stands out to me and while I was reflecting for this panel. The first one is about creating your own experience and pathways. I guess a lot of the conversations and my previous speakers were also mentioning about this. That the sector is huge and it's booming. There are a lot of new roles coming up. There are certain roles that have been conventional but are moving in different directions based on how the larger policy landscape looks like, what funder demands are. And therefore, I guess there is no one linear way or the perfect way of getting into the sector. I have definitely, benefited from this understanding of working with different entities, as I was mentioning. I started out with an organization where I was capacitating government officials and teachers on intrinsic motivation. Moving to that, I did a consultant role with one of the state governments in India on an edtech product that went across scale for that entire state. And previous to this, which was in the philanthropic foundation called Central Square Foundation, I was also leading the strategy and programs in one of the states to improve foundational literacy at scale. I guess all of these different functions helped me look at the problem and address that in different sort of multidisciplinary way. And what I sort of take away from that is that, trying your hands into different consulting gigs, trying out different roles would actually help you start thinking of the way you want to make an improvement towards a larger goal that you have in mind. For me, I think the sector remains the same, education stayed the same, but I kept on sort of looking at different ways. But I think if you are clear about that, that's great. But for others who are still in that, development journey and trying to understand what's next, I would definitely urge you while you are doing this course, if there's some way you can get your hands on with some consulting, with some internships, I think that would definitely help you to hone your skills as well as move ahead in that direction. I think that also brings me to the second point, which is about having a learning mindset. While the conversation about having the right skills and developing those would always stay and equally important, but to me, I think that helped me, which I think Ben was also alluding to, is having that right attitude, having that learning mindset. There are often times you would come into a role and the job spec would, eventually vary. There will be different challenges thrown at you. And I think that's where the learning mindset kicks in. It helps you to look at situation in a way that probably in the organization nobody would have had. And I think that is where a lot of your own self-efficacy would sort of start coming in, where you look at the work and you try to make some changes in the way your experience and the organization's experience sort of intersect together. To do that, I think a lot of listening needs to happen. To do that, a lot of reading needs to happen, because that's something that always keeps updating your own understanding and challenges your own perspectives as well. I think particularly with regards to my experience about this, when I got onto the organization that I was mentioning about, Central Square Foundation, they do a really large scale work on education in India. And there was an opportunity in front of us to target the foundational learning mission. We were trying to come up with a draft of a mission that the government of India could probably take it up and make sure that foundational learning is one of the priorities of the country. It took me personally a couple of sort of months to just get adjusted to the idea of how big the scale we are talking about. There are multiple evidences. There are a lot of work going on in the field. But how do you encapsulate that? How do you bring people together in form of coalitions? Make sure that they are aligned in the larger vision, and then the work goes on in different states to show and demonstrate what really a different way of doing things look like. I think that is an experience that helped me quite a bit, and I guess a lot of it is according to this learning mindset that I kind of try to instill in me in different points in time. Of course, accepting your failures is also a part of that. So I would definitely urge people to reflect much on that. And the last bit is about sharing privilege, which I feel is the best way to utilize it. I have personally had times when I have debated, I've contested my own ways of working, and just trying to understand that all the communities that we serve, how do we balance out the relative privilege that we have had, and how do we make sure that whatever solutions, whatever work we are doing, it's actually done with them rather than for them. It's sort of that kind of a participatory sort of approach that has somehow made me really look at things differently. And it's also probably a reason that, while working with different government stakeholders that we do on day in, day out, a lot of the innovations in the organization, some of the best ways of addressing deep entrenched problems has come out from people who have had lived experience, such as teachers, such as government officials. So definitely believe in that. With that, I think my suggestion would be to also broaden the definition of networking. Sort of build your professional network, try to get into different work streams, try to see what others are doing, but also at the same time, if your network includes people from different geographies, from different socioeconomic strata, I think that would probably also bring those elements of equity in the way you think. And yeah, I think these are some of the things that I wanted to share with you all, and probably if there are other pointers to be discussed, we could take it later. But I would just want to leave you all with one quick landscape, probably the next slide. Yeah, this is from our experience of an international NGO, which is Room to Read, wherein we have been working on different functions, and the idea is to bring all of them together to achieve the mission that I talked about. I guess the way I have categorized this is the first one, which is related to core functions, which is around program design, operations, management, and research monitoring and evaluation. These are the areas where you could translate a lot of the strategy what the organization is thinking of to actually happening things on ground, assess impact, and do quick iterations of what comes next. And these are also some of the roles which are much coveted in international NGOs, in consultancies. I guess if you have specialization in any of these, the idea would be to start looking at cross-cutting roles so that a lot of these knowledge could actually get transacted across. The second bit is about support functions, which are equally important. And I thought this was also the area where some of you may be interested in, be it talent management, organizational development, strategic communications, fundraising, donor management. A lot of these roles look like in terms of supporting the organization, supporting narratives, brand, and helping smoothly talking about it, sharing about it to the external world and the wider ecosystem that is there. Working with donors, looking at what kind of governance mechanisms exist, what could be done differently, would also come under the support functions, as I would see. And lastly, there is also the strategy function. For many of the organizations, I think this is something which is upcoming. A lot of the people who are working at the leadership level, they often have their foot on ground through the people they work with. And that's where the ideas of strategy and learning, wherein you can look at what kind of data flows are there in the system, look at what are the present data, what do we want to communicate, and almost package it in a way to be taken up as a strategy for all the organizational functions to be followed. There's also strategic partnership and advocacy. That's where a lot of the work with nonprofits, with governments sort of comes in, which is about identifying partners, building those partners, and managing those relationships as the project moves ahead. And lastly, within the strategy functions are also the elements of EA to the CEO or the co-founders. And this is also where you have the greatest vantage point of looking at what is happening in the organization and the sector from a relatively micro lens, which would also help you to start out something for your own or maybe support any other organization as you move ahead. So again, I would just go back to what I started up by saying that a lot of these pathways, a lot of these careers are cross-cutting. And the way you look at a particular job, the way you can get the best out of it, would eventually help you look at the other jobs accordingly. And there are always these transferable skills and knowledge that you can bring from one job to the other. At least in the last couple of years, that has helped me, and I hope it does for you too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ratul. I think we're seeing three very different, I guess, ways to work in the field so far, and especially thinking about, who you are. I think Ben mentioned, take a year or two to figure out kind of what your niche is. Ratul's bits on, where do you contribute along these functions and how do you make that transferable in different areas is quite interesting. So thank you, Ratul. Fabricia, I'm going to invite you to join us now.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Will and CEID for the invitation. So I'm really delighted and excited to be part of this panel and also share my experience and exchange with you. So my name is Fabricia Devignes, and I am a senior education and gender specialist, and I lead a flagship program of the International Institute for Educational Planning of UNESCO on gender equality, which is called the Gender at the Center Initiative. I'm based in Africa, in the Africa office of the Institute, located in Dakar, Senegal. And for those who don't know my institution, so the institute is the UNESCO specialized institute with a mandate to strengthen member states' capacity to plan and manage their education systems. And the Gender at the Center initiative that I coordinate champions the leadership of education ministries and civil society actors to advance gender equality in and through education. And since its launch in July 2019, during the French presidency of the G7, GCI has been promoting gender equality in education in 8 African countries. So this is a multi-stakeholder initiative that is led by IIEP-UNESCO United Nations Girls Education Initiative in partnership with Ministries of Education of the 8 countries, G7 donors, and multilateral agencies such as UNESCO, UNICEF, the Global Partnership for Education, the African Union, and also the civil society organization represented by Plan International, FAWE, and CEFA. So I wanted to talk about what I do on a daily basis and also give you some insights regarding my career path. So as lead of the Gender at the Center initiative, I provide an overall leadership of GCI as well as a day-to-day management. I provide strategic guidance and technical support to the 8 member states. This entails the design and implementation of country-specific interventions and activities across the region and across also multiple GCI countries. Responsibilities include policy dialogue with senior government officials, promoting country leadership in GCI, leadership and ownership of gender equality. And also I coordinate with the financial and technical partners, all to advance gender responsive education sector planning and management. I also support governments in addressing the main challenges to meeting national, regional, and international commitments on gender equality. I collaborate with my colleagues at IIEP to mainstream a gender perspective in all our work, from data collection and analysis to policy and strategy formulation and monitoring and evaluation. So, and this work really contributes to the UNESCO gender priority and IEP's commitment to supporting gender equality in and through education. And with more and more demand on gender equality in education, I also supervise the support to other non-GCI countries in Africa and the Caribbean on gender responsive educational planning and policies. So I have 15 years of professional experience in public administration and international development, with operational and managerial experience working with governments, with CSOs at the field level in gender mainstreaming in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe, at different levels also of management, policy formulation, project coordination, development and facilitation of trainings and courses for diverse audiences and in different thematic areas. And prior to joining IIEP-UNESCO, I was a senior policy advisor on gender equality at the French Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, where I coordinated France's international strategy for gender equality, and I guided teams, departments, and embassies and also the 12 operating agencies, such as the French Development Agency, to better integrate gender equality in France's international sectoral priorities on education, sexual and reproductive health and rights, gender-based violence, economic empowerment, and leadership. And I specifically supported and coordinated programs on girls' education, SRHR, and women economic and political leadership in Africa and the Middle East, in partnership with government and CSOs in the field. And my mission really required a strong capacity for collaboration and a high demand for results in order to transform the global objectives of this global strategy, this international strategy, into concrete actions on the ground. I was also a member of the Secretariat of the 2019 G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council, and I made a contribution to integrating gender equality in the G7 French presidency on women's economic empowerment and pushing for funds for feminist movements, and also pushing for improving gender equality in education systems. And I was also a member of the board of directors of the OECD Development Assistance Committee Network on Gender Equality. As such, I really helped improve policies and practices to strengthen gender equality in development programs and to secure girls' and women's rights, contributing to the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. And prior to that, I acted for about 10 years as director of a non-governmental organization, which is called ENDA Europe. I was vice president of the Southern-based network, and I led the network's gender equality strategy, developed the gender capacity of teams across 14 countries, and manage the financial and human resources of the office in Europe. And within this NGO, I have managed dozens of in-country programs funded by different donors and in different countries. And I finally have a background in resource mobilization and partnership development. And I hold a double master's degree in international development and in English, and a diploma of non-violent conflict and human rights from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, USA. So this is my career my career path, and to access these positions, I had to really test my patience, as the colleagues said previously, and I had to be really perseverant. I applied, sent hundreds of CVs, passed written tests, interviews, had trouble to sleep. So it's not an easy and restful process. I had to monitor available opportunities, vacant positions. So my advice for students is, as the colleague said, yeah, be patient and believe in yourself, and you can do it. And I totally agree with what has been shared earlier. A good entry point is to really start from internship or apply for volunteer positions, junior consultancy, and also, yeah, build your network, push for direct contacts, get a mentor, be curious. There are no direct pathways, and as said earlier, the hardest thing is really to be inside, but you can do it. And there are many challenges, as these are competitive, long recruitments, but once in the job, you also have many challenges. You have to adapt to the sometimes heavy procedures of the institutions. There can be bureaucracies, so you need to be flexible, you need to be adaptable. This is something that I really learned from my experience, but this is really enriching, exciting, and varied various missions, in direct contact with governments to construct public policies, and yeah, working on missions that have really meaning and impact. And my current work is really to integrate gender issues in education systems, but this is really an ambitious and a long-term goal. But so it's really exciting to work on a goal of social transformation. It's never boring, and you will evolve in a multicultural environment, travel a lot, discover many countries. So it's really worth it, worth the pain, I would say, to access the positions. And one career highlight, I would say, and maybe I join my colleagues saying, that really hands-on experience working with civil society organizations, working with grassroots organizations, really was very helpful and useful for my career in international organizations. So I really stopped there. Oh yeah, and maybe one skill and competency that I really needed throughout my experience is really the diplomatic finesse and sensitivity to local norms and values that if you don't have it, might imperil different discourses, and especially when you come from outside, and when you come from a Western background. So and really to have excellent interpersonal and communication skills as well were very I would say very important for my work amongst other competencies and skills that were required. So I'm gonna stop there. I'm really conscious of the time, but I'm really happy to answer any questions and about my career journey. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Fabricia. It's great to see, talking about kind of everybody's journey, and to see that you found one that you're passionate about, that type of interest and passion that kind of drive your sense that wanting to go out there and make a difference, which is wonderful. I know that's where most of my students are too. So I want to invite Sidra up. As Sidra's coming up, though, please do. I know we've got some questions in the chat already. Please do continue to add your questions to the chat. When Sidra's over, we'll have a open Q&A, and we'll get to some of the questions in the chat to start us off. So, Sidra, go ahead and join us. And I know I've got a slide from you, so please let me know when you want me to share.
Sure. Thank you, Will. So good afternoon from my end. Good morning to everyone, and good evening from wherever you're joining. I am currently with Mercy Corps, which is an INGO, and we work in 40 plus countries. My career path is a bit unconventional. I started out really late. I'm the product of a very patriarchal society, and I did not know until very late what I stumbled upon as to knowing this is what I wanted to do. But it's been an interesting journey, and in spite of the fact that it's not been very planned, as Rahul said, Ratul said as the trajectory, and that how we should be mindful of it. I think a lot of the things that came my way and have come my way have been very it's not been something I've planned on, but there are still some things that I did to, reach this point. So first of all, I did my master's in public administration from Pakistan, which is where I'm based. I'm in Lahore. And then I did for a while, I worked as a teacher, I worked in a university, and I realized that I wanted to learn more, and I felt that I wanted to be part of more of the academic or the learning community. And then I ended up going to UCL, IOE, and I did my master's in education, gender, international development. At that point, I did not know what gender was. At that point, it took me a while to adapt to localizing that concept for myself in my own culture and my own society. Since then, it's been a little, when I got back from my master's, I had switched sectors. So it was harder for me to get in. And also it was harder because I wasn't based in Islamabad, which is the capital. And what happens is a lot of the development activity, it happens in the capitals of our countries. And that's where you get good positions, good opportunities. So after a very long effort, I'll be honest, I didn't have work for a very long time. I did take up some courses that I could do online, but everything wasn't remote or virtual as it is now. And then I started working with, it was now what is the Global Affairs Canada entity, was known as CEID. They were doing a project on education, and they had a regional office in Lahore. I joined them as a research associate, and the position was so, it was just something to help everyone, to assist everyone, to the point that when I asked, so what's the title of my position? One of the managers said, oh, you can call yourself whatever you want. I mean, that's how flexible they were. But the thing is, I think when there's this intent, and then when you're focused on what you want to achieve, I think you get to that point. I was within a year given the position of the project officer gender. And I think it got the ball rolling. I got a lot of opportunities that way, but this was a 5-year project. Now, there, there were times that I did not have a lot of people to tell me, to guide me through the process, because gender was something which was maybe something which was, topped up, not something which was ingrained within the projects at the time. But it helped me understand how the project worked. I had to support a lot of other team members in M&E, in communications. And I think that was the vital time being with it, that organized with that project, that I learned how to maybe write a basic report as well. Um, uh, so while honing my skills, at the same time, the employer who I was working with, that is, who was implementing the project, realized they could get more out of me. So they started making me do consulting with them. As someone at the back end, I would write reports, I would do a lot of things, and I would also be doing my own job, the full-time job that I had, and I would sometimes not be paid for the work that I was doing as a consultant. Um, but to be very honest, I think for me, it was the drive to learn. I think one of my colleagues said in their presentations was lifelong learning, and that is what it is. And then beyond that, so there was a lot of transition in my life. Got married. It was a blended family. My son had ADHD, which I helped diagnose. So I started consulting, and eventually I set up my own firm because I realized that I needed to keep my CV going, and I needed to create work for myself, because every time a project ended, I would be at zero. So slowly and steadily, once I got my foot in the door, it did help. And I think the fact that this keeps coming up is you do short-term work or you do internships, but once you do short-term work and position that current I'm working on is not directly related but to gender, and it's a new position. It was not something which existed when I joined the organization. And I asked, so when I joined, I was doing Jesse, I was doing safeguarding, I was doing GDI for Asia. Jesse, I was doing for Myanmar. And it's the reason I got this, one of the reasons was that I was doing a lot of consultancies because of COVID. A lot of remote opportunities opened up. Now, when remote opportunities open up, you do get work which otherwise from a global South country, it's very hard to get. You are not even shortlisted because at times you cannot travel to these countries to get that work. So with COVID, I got a lot of opportunities. I got regional work, I got international work. And when this opportunity with Mercy Corps came up, this was again a remote opportunity. The only condition for the position was that they have to have an office in the country. So there is an office in the country, and the head office is in another city. They have a regional office, but I work remotely, and I work now with. So my job is, it's more inward looking in the organization, and I have to make sure that the voices of diverse groups are heard. We are trying to ensure that there is this, there are certain diversity in targets that the organization has come up with, and we're trying to meet those. This is more at the headquarter level, but we're also trying to now make it localized. I think with Mercor, and I think a lot of other INGOs, is they're more focused on localization now, which means that they're trying to, nationalize a lot of the positions. They're trying to give opportunity in a more equitable manner. So so that the people who are within the countries, the staff within the country teams are now more local. We have fewer expats. I mean, that's the eventual. Eventually that's what we want to achieve. So that's how I ended up here. But before that, I've been working with Cambridge Education. I've been working with for example, World Hunger Hill, which work was consulting. As I said, I had to create work. I did not have a full-time option here in this city. And now with the remote work option, I do have a full-time option, and I am, know, enjoying that work. I can't say, as I said, it's directly related to gender and education, which was my niche and which I've been able to, use and build my career on. Um, Consultant, I think the opportunity and exposure I've received has been great. It's been more very different, very unique. I think there are pros and cons working with as a consultant and with a full-time organization. The learning I have now is very, I think it makes me realize that the value of longer term relationships, how to see one thing through to the end, and how unique your impact can be. So for example, the work that I do in Myanmar is very different from the work that I do in Afghanistan to the work that I do in Ukraine, and the support that I provide to the team is different. And I think the value to putting yourself out there, owning the space that you're in, is very important. The one thing I'd like to flag is coming from, the background that I am. A lot of the times I am challenged in terms of presenting myself, in terms of speaking up, in terms of having a severe case of imposter syndrome. Mostly at times I am the oldest person in a room full of younger people. So I think we all have our unique journeys, but I also think that we need to own our space. We need to understand that not everyone will follow the same path, but it's about the impact that you make, and it's about it's not about, it's just not that meeting a certain milestone at a certain time. It's about eventually, I think, enjoying the journey and, feeling that what you're doing is meaningful. I did have what I did was I shared a slide which was basically, it's an activity called the River of Life, and I shared it with for a for a for an orientation with, there's a global equity on this global center on the on gender equality, with it was housed previously within Stanford University. I was a consultant with them until they now it's with the new venture fund. So this is essentially, as you can see, my life's journey, and how it moved from being a science geek towards someone who's now working with a lot of worked with a lot of international NGOs and organizations, and donors, and the government as well. And I'll be honest with you, the work I'm doing now, I feel that I'm really enjoying it. I think that it's very different from what I've been doing in the past, but I feel it's also very meaningful, and I think it's something which is now new, not really something which has been, we're not reinventing the wheel, but I feel that we are empowering local communities and organizations and people and teams and people I've learned to love over time, because I work with them and I see that side of them that otherwise I would not see. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I know it's a very unconventional way to present it, but that sums it up.
Excellent. Thank you, Sidra. So I can see that we've got a good amount of questions popping up, and we're going to move into our question time here. If you've got other questions, please do add them to the chat. Given we've got about 20 minutes or so left, I'm going to grab a question from the chat and ask one or a few of you to answer. So if you're really passionate about it, please jump in. But I don't think we have time for everybody to address every question. So I'm going to start with a question that I think we've had from Rebecca and Karen, which I think was spurred from a little bit of shock value from Leila's comment on you only spend 5 to 10 seconds on a CV. So can you give a little bit more advice? Does that mean we should be focusing on certain things in the CV at the beginning, Leila, or are there do you look at personal statements? Like what order do you process things in, and what should we have up front?
Thanks, Will, and apologies, everyone. I really didn't want to freak everyone out. And I know that, please be aware that obviously, you know, every organization is different and every hiring process is different. But maybe I will say that you should be preparing your CVs as if someone is only going to spend 10 seconds on it. In other words, they should be clear, they should be concise. If you've got a personal statement, just a couple of lines, and in particular, make sure that the words you're using to describe yourself correspond to the words that the person is looking for. So if they're looking for a gender specialist, you should be mentioning your gender experience right up the top in big letters. So I guess that was probably what I was trying to say, is that people are going to be scanning. If you're copying and pasting anything from another document into your CV, then something's wrong. And you should be redoing your CV every single time. So anyway, so just to reissue, in relation to the letters as well, the cover letters, yes, they are read, definitely. And in particular, if you've seen someone's CV and you think, they look interesting, but I'm not quite sure, that's when they're going to read the cover letters. So unfortunately, they're very time-consuming cover letters, but they do get read. So I think I hope that's a little bit more reassuring. And maybe just to mention also, just if you don't mind, Will, if I can just jump in on this question about because there's a few questions I saw about, you know, getting a foot in the door. It's all about getting your foot in the door. And unfortunately, to get in the foot in the door, a lot of the time it's going to be through internships, which may not be paid, pro bono work, doing some volunteering, and short-term consultancies. Obviously, the goal is that after a couple of years of doing this, that it leads to something more stable. And a lot of the time it will. And that's your personal decision, as well as how long you're willing to jump around and stay in these kind of less permanent positions. And if after a while you think, you know what, this is just too hard for me, then you can try and maybe move into something, maybe a different organization. If you're saying it's too hard, I'm struggling to get into a UN organization, but then, you know, maybe move across to an NGO. Just fun fact, the first year, so I started at UNESCO as an intern, which is an unpaid internship. The first year I was working at UNESCO as an intern, every night I'd go and work in a bar because I needed to make some money, basically. So just to let you know that there is that factor, that it does involve quite a bit of personal sacrifice, depending on each and everyone's journey and your own luck and experience. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Will, can I just jump in with a very, very quick point on the cover letter, which is something that when I've been recruiting staff in the past, I've really noticed. Always keep it to a page. I would always keep it to one page. Don't go over one page. And try not to don't pick out all the words in the job description and just describe that you are them. Describe things that you've done and achieved that show to the person reading it that you have those skills and that you understand the job description. Saying, I am a X and I can do Y, although it's crucial to get that point across, I think it's beneficial if you can do that through concrete examples of you doing that thing. Just to add that onto Leila's advice about the application process. Thanks.
I want to follow up with both of those, and I'm looking for just one or two to help with this. All of you kind of talked about almost like an imposter syndrome at some point in your career journey. And I can imagine people seeing a job description and saying, wow, I can't do all of that. And so advice for people that, you know, do you need to be there for all of the description? How do you sell yourself with this? For those that are looking at things and they're like, I can't do that. When is that real and when is that, you know, just an internal concern? Wondering if anybody can help with those that are looking at all the jobs and saying, wow, I can't do any of that. What are the essential things that they really have to do? And do they have to fit all of the job description? Anybody, Ratul, Fabricia? Yeah, Fabricia, come on in.
Yeah, I don't think that we we need to have everything. I think that it's also a question of self-confidence, and it depends also on what is expected. You know, what are the required qualification, what are the desirable qualifications. It depends also on the recruitment. But I would say that from my personal experience, I didn't have, all the things, to be able to be, hired, for a job. But for sure, I needed to really put forward, my very main assets. And as Ben said, you need to put concrete examples and tell them why you are the best positioned for the post, and also what you can bring and what are the potentials. And I think that it's also important to explain that, or to demonstrate that you have also this learning. Someone talked about it's a lifelong learning experience, and see that you are also eager also to learn, even though you bring some strong assets, and I think that, yeah, it's a question also of self-confidence. But yeah, from my own experience, I didn't have, it depends on the job. But my last job, for example, my last position, the current position, they asked for 10-year experience in sector planning, and I didn't have that. I had several experience in education and public policies, but I had to show how I could, even though I don't have this, and how it's been 3.5 years now that I'm in this job, and I think I'm doing great. So I think that it's also a question of also mindsets, and also how with all the assets that you have, you don't have 100%, but that's okay.
Excellent. Thanks, Fabricia. Sidra, you want to jump in?
I want to second that with the fact that, yes, the confidence and the fact that I think a lot of the people who are interviewing us look at our potential as well. So if they see that that we can deliver, they will consider us. At least in this position that I applied for, I also had to show that I had safeguarding skills, but I didn't. I mean, I think the only thing I'd had in that regard was my orientations that I had with FCDO. I was aware of it, but because the nature of the work was such that maybe they would not have found someone else as well with the entire package. So they had to pick who would they think that who could have the potential, who could learn, or who could maybe pick up those key concepts or those policies and take them forward. So I think it is about potential and how confident the other person feels in your abilities that you can, make up for what you don't have.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to jump to a couple of, I think, related questions which deal to kind of the maybe less stable nature of this field. So a lot of you have had, a couple of years working one place and then a couple of years working the other place, or even smaller short-term contracts around that. We've got two questions. One is kind of, how do you measure your job satisfaction, meaningness of the job? I think the type of self-sacrifices that you have to make, and kind of balancing that with the meaning that the job gives for you. So if you can talk a little bit about balancing self-sacrifice versus kind of the passion you have around it. The other question is a little more specific, I guess, which would be, what about your future financially, especially? So there's a question on, like, if you're continuing to have these shorter term contracts, do you have your own savings? Is there pensions? How do we make sure that you're not working until you're 95? So anybody want to jump in on kind of the challenging nature of some of this work?
I've probably
Ratul?
got a few years less experience than maybe other panelists, so I'm speaking from a smaller sample size of potentially. But I mean, first thing I'd say is it kind of changes as time goes by and as your own kind of personal situation, evolves through life. And I think Cedra set out quite eloquently some of the kind of things that she'd been through whilst finding her feet in this career. And I think it's going to be different for everyone. I mean, for me personally, when I first got in, I was doing the same as Leila. I was like working in the supermarket in the morning, doing bar jobs, earning, probably just under the minimum wage, to be honest, based on the amount of hours I was working. But at that moment in time, that's all that mattered to me. That was the thing in my life that mattered most. And I was going to put everything else aside to make sure that I grabbed that opportunity with both hands. And as time has gone on, and I've gone through different types of contracts, and I'm moving on in my relationship, and your life evolves, and you start having different priorities, and you have to kind of you have to start asking yourself some tricky questions about the financial stability. And many of these jobs are based in big cities like London or Paris or New York or somewhere where it averages a few $1,000s a month just to rent a place. So I'm not going to skirt around the edges and say that it's all easy, and I guess you will at some point have to potentially make some decisions around that kind of thing. But I would just say it's difficult to answer that one so straight, because it really depends on your personal situation at that moment in time. Over.
All right, thanks, Ben. Ratul, I saw you unmute for a second. Do you want to jump in on either kind of this balance piece, or how do you prepare financially for the future? So, Ratul, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. No, thanks. Kind of made me think for a while what I'm doing in future and now. I guess it varies. It's up to people in the way you look at and the work that is there in front of us. Just a quick landscaping of the different organizations that exist, right from the spectrum of nonprofits to research organizations to consultancies. It is for sure that the pay parity that exists in different sort of organization entities vary. And that's where I guess it's also an individual call for people to take, that with the skills that you bring to the table, with the work that you are doing, where do you see yourself being positioned? And I'm all for altruism and all for understanding there's a larger cause at hand, but I also do recognize and appreciate the effort that all of us bring, into these jobs. And I wouldn't sort of, discredit it for anything. And for that matter, if it requires for personal advocacy for higher pay or adjusted pay, I would definitely urge, my friends, my colleagues, etc., to sort of take that on. But having said that, I would also sort of, think that there are a lot of opportunities these days, and you would have to do your sort of, background checks. You would also have to speak to others who are, already in the sector, to really see what fits you and where sort of, take it ahead. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, certainly there are things that we take on while being part of the development sector, wherein there is no clear linear pathway to change. There are externalities involved, there are people involved of different sorts, and as a result, the kind of satisfaction that I personally derive from it is just working with people. It may be different for someone else, and for them, that planning, that ideation would look different. So yeah, I mean, not a clear answer for sure, but figure it out. I would say this is how I think the sector looks like. It's slightly fragmented, but there's a lot of opportunity.
Excellent, thank you. I want to ask another kind of set of related questions here about those applicants that are coming from the Global South. And so specifically trying to think about, so we've got a couple of questions. One here from Rui, who's talking about how are applicants from the Global North perceived in recruitment to international, or from the Global South perceived in recruitment to international organizations in the Global North. How are their firsthand experience seen? And another question on thinking about kind of remote, or do these international organizations also provide visa support or transportation to it? So if I'm an applicant from the Global South and looking to get in, do I need to limit it to remote work? Is there visa support available? How am I perceived in this recruitment process? So anybody want to jump in there?
Maybe I'll start. I think they're very well perceived. I think sometimes in a lot of organizations, actually, a lot of organizations are making an effort to recruit from the Global South. I think maybe what might be sometimes a bit of an issue is how this resonates with the fact that often people are looking to hire from like-minded organizations, or similar organizations. So if you're coming from the Global South, but you're working with an organization maybe which isn't an international NGO or doesn't work with international partners, and isn't very well known, then that might be a bit trickier. So I'd say that if you're coming with a developing country experience, then it'll be good if either the organization you're working with locally is either is an international organization with a local branch where you are, or maybe that it's a local organization but working with international partners, so that somehow that international experience is coming in. In terms of visas, I think visas really depends on the different organizations. Unfortunately, you'd have to try. I think sometimes what happens is that visas are provided for people on some types of consultancies, but not for others, and some interns, but not for others. So unfortunately, you'd really have to look into that on a case-by-case basis. Luckily now that with more virtual work, there's more opportunities to do internships and other consultancies virtually, so you don't have to travel to the country, so you don't have to go through the hassle of trying to get a visa. And let's hope that actually continues, because I think that offers a lot more opportunities. But if not, it's really on a case-by-case basis. I know that, for example, in UNESCO in Paris, you could do an internship if you were from a certain nationality, but as long as it was for less than 3 months, which meant that you didn't need to get an actual visa, you could come in on a tourist visa. So visas can be actually quite complicated, unfortunately, especially with these non-permanent positions. If it's a permanent position, then normally the organization will look after you. Thanks, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Leila. Sidra?
So I think it's what I've seen is that it is the organizations, and they have to be very intentional if they want to do this. Some of it is not that they don't want to. I mean, what we've seen especially is experience from developing countries is very vital and very valued and very valuable in terms of the work that we eventually do. But it becomes more of a logistical issue, and then it's not that it's intentionally done, but unfortunately, I'll be very honest with you, it's really hard to get these visas. I do now, for example, travel for my work. I am getting visas for travel, but if it means to, relocate, that would be harder, especially coming from Pakistan, which is one of the most difficult countries to get a visa for. But remote work has given us those opportunities, as I said, that we didn't have before. But having said that, I'll be very honest with you. I can give you a very practical example. I signed my contract in dollars, and I get paid at the same rate at the date that the contract was signed. And the rate has, for example, the rupee has gone down, and it's really, and it's so for me at this point, I'm just suffering because of that. So these are logistical issues that once you, with remote work, even if you're living in that country and you're unable to, avail those opportunities, it becomes a struggle. And at the end of the day, what happens is that in the longer run, you do end up not getting the same opportunities as someone from the global north would do. But as I said, I'm here, I'm still, they're doing the hustle. So it's something we have to, struggle for, and we have to be innovative and resilient in this, in this scenario, especially considering that every day there is a new challenge that we're facing globally. It's either, an earthquake, it's a conflict. I think these, and I think these zones, unfortunately, are also providing, these these ways that we can enter the sector and get those visas. But it's hard. I'm from someone who's part of it. It's harder.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to wrap this up in a few things. So, Fabricia, I'm going to wrap things up. So everybody's going to have a last chance to speak. So please feel free to join within that. But before we get to that, though, we had a couple logistical questions. So I want very, very brief answers. Basically, where should people be looking for jobs? And what is the timeline for getting a job from when you apply to when you secure? Is that short? Is it 2 weeks? Does it differ? So where do you look for jobs? And what's the timeline for securing a job? So Ratul, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would think there are a bunch of websites that are there on international jobs. You can filter it down to the functions, to the geographies that you're interested in. Apart from that, what has really worked for me is LinkedIn and Twitter, with the kind of people you want to work with and the organizations that you want to work with. Do go on their pages, follow them, try to see what they are doing. And eventually, if a post comes up, you are better acquainted with their work, and then your cover letter and all the other applications would start sinking in better. So yeah, I think that's what I would say. And for from a global organization point of view, the recruitment timeline can again vary, but we usually have a portal through which we accept the applications, and then in at least a fortnight we start resonating with whatever is the next step and how we want to take that ahead. So that's how it works for us.
Okay, we got another vote for looking at LinkedIn in the chat from Sidra. Anybody else want to jump in with other advice on where would you look? Okay, all right. Final bit then. So we have joining us today students that are, I think, typically finishing their master's or working on their PhD and thinking about final bits. They're looking at, well, what is my next steps? Should I be focusing, if I want a job in here, do I focus on field work? Do I focus on getting experience through an internship? Should I be focusing on my language? Should I be getting a PhD? What should my next step be? How do I prepare for something like this? So there's lots of good advice, but if you can go away with kind of your final bits of wisdom here, what's your last final brief bits of wisdom? So Ben, can I start with you?
Oh, that's a tricky one, that will. I feel like completely unqualified to advise a PhD student on what the next step should be for them, because I didn't get that far. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think going back to what I said earlier about finding your niche, finding the thing that keeps you engaged, keeps you motivated, gets you out of bed every morning energized, and like if you haven't quite figured that out yet by the end of your PhD or the end of your master's program, some of the different workplace opportunities that Leila ran through, the consultancies and the internships and the various different entry level positions, you'd hope that after a couple of years of maybe moving through a few 6-month, 1-year contracts and dipping your toes in the water of a few different areas, that you'll start to get a bit of a clearer idea of what your niche is and what your passion is. So I guess my advice would be to be curious and to keep on going until you figure out what that is, and then build your network from there. Once you kind of figure out where you want to be, that's when you can start really setting yourself kind of career goals and objectives and building your network and finding the right mentor for you. So that would be. Can I also just very quickly, Will, just answer the question in the chat about the communications job? I'll do it in 20 seconds. I would say teach yourself how to use a proper camera and some film, editing software. Like in the modern world, like that, especially if you're working for a small NGO or something, the more technical skills you can have, so much more appealing you're going to be to a hiring manager who's got very restricted budget and wants someone that can come in and be like a bit of a Swiss Army knife that can do everything. So, you know, get those skills yourself. Learn how to write blogs, set up your own blog, learn how to convey an argument in 300 words in a compelling way with subheadings that's very succinct. And then maybe also take the opportunity of all of this stuff that's happening with AI and Chat GPT and things that, you know, these things can write communications material, perhaps that aren't quite there, but learning how to use that in a way that would be useful for a marketing or comms team, I think, is maybe another way to be one step ahead of other people and work efficiently. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben. Fabricia, your last bits of wisdom for everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I guess that it fully depends on, you have to know exactly what you want to do. For a PhD student, I think that I will definitely advise to know if you want to develop your career in the field, or if you want to do it, you know, at headquarter level, or but I will definitely advise on a junior consultancy. I know from experience that after a PhD, this is, I think, that there are skills in there that are of most interest for organizations. So yeah, but yeah, it's really tricky, as Ben said, because it really depends on the path you wanna give to your career. So but I know that, yeah, consultancies are, you know, maybe a good entry point, junior consultancies.
Excellent. Thanks, Fabricia. Ratul, how about your last bits of wisdom?
Yeah, no, I think much of it has already been said, but do value and do focus a little bit more on your well-being. Try to look at, you know, with the job hunting could also be exhausting, but also at the same time treat it with a lot of opportunity wherein you can meet new people, know about their work, and also see if that fitment sort of works for you. So it's equally, you know, your stake is there as much the organization's is, and a lot of the work would also get done while you're into the job. So I think in sort of work training and in service professional development would always be relevant. So don't worry if you don't have got it like 100% of it, but a lot of it would be coming if you find the right place. So yeah, good luck.
Excellent. Thanks, Ratul. Sidra.
So I think that there's no right answer. And I think, as Ben said, once you find your niche and what interests you at that time. And I also personally think that even if you've started working and at some point you think, you know, I do not want to stay in this mode right now, and I want to go back to research, it's never too late to try and to start, you know, rethink what you want to do. And to be very honest, I think we always add value to whatever we do. So experience would add value to your academic research. Your academic research would always add value to the work that you do. So I would think that go with what makes sense to you at that point. And I think sometimes things don't just happen as we can just try, and then, you know, we find out where we sometimes end up where we have to be. Sometimes we've not planned that. So I think live in the moment at the point and see, does this work for you? And then, and until you have an idea. So for example, for me, for a long time, I did not want to do a full-time job because I would just get bored of doing the same thing day in, day out. And that's why I jumped to consulting. And then after a few years in consulting, I realized it was really stressful, and the constant deadlines and, you know, multiple clients. And so I think you have the right to change your mind. So it's never too late.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. I know we went slightly over. Before we wrap up today, just a reminder that we'll have our career panel 2 tomorrow. I think a lot of our participants have already registered, but if you haven't, registration is going to stay open for about the next 4 hours. Please do feel free to jump on to join us tomorrow. We'll have 6 different participants from other organizations with other great knowledge. So as we wrap up, I want to give a big thank you to our panelists. I appreciate you joining us from all over the world to share your insights. on your careers and help guide us in our next steps. I also want to thank our CID event planning team, including Adriana, who's leading today. I know Masaki's joined us as well, and Zhao. If you want to hear more about the Comparative Ed International Development Community, you can follow us on Twitter or look at our research group or our master's program. So thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. So thanks so much for the panelists for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.